Hey everyone, welcome once again to BoxTalks. This is a truly special episode, and I'm not gonna try and keep too much of mystery around who our current guest is. It is Conrad Anker. Now, this is a man whose career it is really difficult to condense into a line or a resume. If you Google Conrad Anker, you're gonna come across words like visionary and pioneer and legend and all these superlatives. And you're going to read about his ascent of the shark's fin on Mount Meru. You're going to definitely read about the fact that he discovered George Mallory's body on a search expedition to Everest in 1999. Now, these are the things that he's famous for at a level, among many other things. But a climber is so much more. And I don't think most climbers would like to be reduced to their most famous achievements. So, with that in mind, today's episode is going to focus on the trajectory of his career, which has been immensely successful, but also has been interlocked with a lot of tragedy. He's lost mentors, he's lost friends, he lost his best friend, Alex Lowe, in an accident. And over the years, he's experienced a lot of grief. What does this do to a person? What did this do to Conrad Anker? How has his process of dealing with loss evolved over the years? That's going to be one of the core subjects of our conversation today. We also talk about his very first visit to India and what his objectives were at the time, his views on the history of expeditions and exploration, and in that light, privilege in the modern climbing age. He also talks about some incredible mentorship work he's done at the Khumbu Climbing Center. And if something like that is possible in India, proper grassroots mentorship initiatives, essentially how older and younger climbing cultures can interact. And all these differences aside, what is it about climbing that so fundamentally unites people? It's a philosophical, it's an airy question, but I don't think there's many people more qualified than Conrad Anker to answer that. So without too much more of a build up, Box Talks with Conrad Anker is about to begin. I really hope you guys enjoy this because it's been a privilege. Hi, Conrad.
Hello, greetings, good morning, good evening.
Good night. It's 10:30 actually.
Yeah, 12 hours time difference.
I'm guessing you're normally a morning person.
Yep. Always get up early, get after it.
Yeah, it wouldn't necessarily help for you to be otherwise. Okay, great. So first and foremost, thank you so much for choosing to come on Box Talks. It's a privilege, and it's kind of hard for me to introduce you, honestly, given the scope of your achievements and just how much you've done. But I'm just going to say to our audience that this is a man who is very much at the soul of mountaineering and alpinism history, and he's a man with a lot of experience and perspective to offer, which is what we aim to do over here at Box Talks. So, Conrad Anker, officially welcome again. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So,
how are you doing these days? What keeps your time going?
Yeah, great question. So here we are. It's June 2020, and starting January, we had the global pandemic sweep across the world, and then beginning on Memorial Day, 25th of May here in the United States, the civil unrest, which is leading to a global civil rights movement. So there's we're at this inflection point in humanity. We have two very significant things happening at the same time.
Yeah, it's a complicated thing, and I actually did want to chat with you about this. How do you find yourself as someone who's been a voice for the sport and for just basically outdoor living and adventure for so long? How do you find yourself in this capacity dealing with what's happening over there?
Yeah, initially with the COVID pandemic, my optimistic part of me was like, okay, humans are going to come together. We're going to understand each other. We're going to um, be better, and we're going to work towards things. And that was um, hopefully going in that direction. But certainly there's exceptions to that. And some people here in the United States and other parts of the world were not as together on the mission at this as the same time, if we may. And then with civil rights in the United States, it's something that's long overdue, this discussion.
Mm.
1968, after the assassination of Martin Luther King, there was civil unrest, and it became the civil rights movement, and rioting, many of the same things that we're seeing take place here. And that was 52 years ago. And that structural, systematic, and systemic racism is still very prevalent in the United States, if not the world. And that is that's a reckoning. And as a citizen of the United States, as a white male, there's a lot of responsibility and culpability and on this part. So there's that we've all been made aware of this, and that we can open our ears and our consciousness and our world views to discussion is a step forward.
It's such a it's such a heavy topic, because I've obviously been following what the climbing world's been saying and doing, sitting over here in India, and the way that I've always, well, if not always, at least recently looked at it is, it is a global conversation. And of late, there has been privilege within the world of climbing has become a discussion. It's become one of the angles of the ways in which a lot of climbers are trying to address the situation that's happening. So, because I obviously come from a young climbing culture, a newer climbing culture, and you come from one of the oldest and most mature and established climbing cultures. So, in that context, what I actually wanted to get a sense of from you is, how do you feel, given everything that has happened, older climbing cultures can help or mentor younger ones to sort of develop a more uniform global climbing language, if you will?
Yeah, great question. So, two ways to start this that we can talk about this. One is a prism of how we make decisions and of that, and the other one is the history of exploration. And so, start with the prism of where I see climbing and why it's significant. And the basis of it is that you create friends, and the adversary is not another group of humans. It's not a set of rules. It's not the cricket pitch. It's not human against human, and one team wins. And even though you're supposed to be always happy and be kind of the team that you lost, the ego gets the better of you, and you're like, yeah, we won, and that was it. But if you're climbing, this right here, that's a pencil sharpener at my desk. That's not what we're challenging. It's gravity. And that is our unifying connection. And when we meet, even though we've never met in person, that you have a bouldering gym in Delhi and that we have mutual friends, and we'll discover who the friends are, we share a common language that we're instantly friends. And I think that makes people less anonymous and more and closer to people. And the basis of that is the manner in which we as climbers communicate with each other. And it's, you've got this, and send it, I'm spotting you, help out, or try that with a side pull, or you need some chalk, or can I share my water with you? I mean, we're very much supportive, and that way in which humans communicate is wonderful. So wherever I go, wherever I travel, I always have climbing slippers with me. And I always go to the climbing gym, and it's amazing because there it is. I meet friends instantly. I go to the gym, and it might be different as I'm being in climbing as long as I am. But if that wasn't the case, anyone can go to a climbing gym, and that the knowledge of what a belay is and how we communicate with other people is really the fundamental prism of how we're a movement for good, and how we're going to change the change the world for the better. And that is something I some people might think, oh, you're naive. I'm optimistic. Climbing will never make that change, but it does. So when you make that change within yourself, you make it with your family, and then you make it with your friends. There's into your community, your town, your slightly larger region, your nation, and the world. And that we keep moving forward with goodness in our hearts, that we have that moment. And so in that sense, climbing culture is very young. But when we think about exploration in the bigger word, in expedition, if we look at the Latin root of them, ex means to leave, ped is foot. So to leave on foot is an expedition. Exploration is to leave, and plorare is to call out in Latin, to share something that. But the reality of it, exploration, until we did these sort of these motivational goals like the South Pole, Mount Everest, North Pole, the Mariana Trench, we weren't going there for monetary purposes. And monetary purposes were the foundation of what exploration on the world. And it was white Europeans exploring. So to trade with people, to enslave people, cultural imperialism, that is the spread of religion, all these we have to reckon with that, and we have to understand that. And it's something that India, from 1947 onwards, is very aware of. The East India Company, the relationship between culture and races within India, and how they get along is very much a part of that. And from that, climbing sort of came around. It started, say, as a sport in the mid 19th century, 1850s, when the landed gentry of England and Europe went to the Alps, and they would hire woodcutters and shepherds to take them in the mountains. And that was sort of the beginning of it. And these lofty goals of, oh, I went climbing and I became a better person, things like that, similar to what we were just talking about, were the motivation of it. But the people that went climbing, in their hierarchy of needs, food, shelter, clothing had all been met, education had been met, income had been met, and they were working towards self-actualization. But because of that, as it is tied into white privilege, it was basically people that looked like me that had the opportunity to go do that. And from my own sense, growing up outside of Yosemite National Park, and so the mountains were what we did in the summertime, and my parents introduced me to them, and it was there was that fundamental beauty that we saw in there. So yeah, that two big things. So off to you, Siddhartha, your ideas.
So, well, it's a huge topic to unpack. But by the way, my name is Dhillan. Siddharth was the one who was in communication with you. Actually, the story is he's
Okay.
right now in. No, it's an interesting story why he's not here, because he's in Uttarakhand right now, and the reception is terrible. So he actually, if he was having this conversation, it would be just entirely disjointed. But it's fine. Like, it doesn't matter. I mean, it was
My
just
apologies, Dylan.
no apologies needed at all. It's my name's been no, I don't take offense to that sort of thing. Geez, being in India right now, what's happening is, of course, globalization is happening, and it's not as disconnected a world as it used to be. So earlier, it was as simple as, oh, them, foreigners, they're just different. They can do this sort of thing. They're out to do this sort of thing, but you as an Indian, your reality is different. But what's happening now is, obviously, there's a big surge of information. So, we get more insight into the way someone like yourself and your peers have lived, your motivations, your goals, and so on and such. But at the same time, because of this long history that precedes you and me, there is a bit of baggage. And I think that is the point that the Indian climbing community is at in some form or fashion right now. I mean, there are these goals, there are these aspirations, but the opportunities are not equal. They want to do it. They want to, it's not, it's not like the 40s or the 50s where you simply can't dream. You can dream. You can even scratch, but you can't do as much. And hence it is an organic growth. It's still hard to really justify to either your parents or, generally speaking, society, what climbing is. I mean, especially what bouldering is. They ask you, okay, what is this? Is this a bed? Is this a mat? And then the first question you will often get asked as an Indian who's pursuing climbing seriously is, what's in it for you? And that's a very telling question. It's not one to take offense at. It's not one to get all burnt up about and say, no, 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 you don't get the beauty of climbing. You don't get this. You don't get that, because that's history. That's your life speaking. And it's really hard to justify what's in it. That first part you spoke about, that universal language of movement, that joy of simply being able to share beta on a problem or a climb. That first part people get, but the second thing is like, okay, why are you investing this much of time in this? I mean, ultimately, are you walking away with a better life, with more economic opportunity, with the ability to go back and support your family, any of those things? So in a sense, if we're talking about the journey of climbing dreams, I think India is right now in a place where people can scratch but not really reach, you know and I guess that's what comes from being young through an art movement or through a culture. And it was, yeah, which is why I wanted to have that conversation about how older cultures can mentor younger cultures and help them get a bit more robust in terms of yeah, setting up a system where more people can practice this and more people can practice this at a higher level.
Yeah, great. Great observations. And yeah, people, the same thing here. They're like, why are you climbing? It's a frivolous pursuit. So, but we could say the same thing for cricket. I mean, no one's, but there's a whole business around cricket, and
that's the thing, right?
Climbers, yeah. We're sort of individualists, and we're going out, we do these things, but we have a community with them. And so we're sort of non-team sport, team players in a sense, in that, and looking at that. And yeah, the history of climbing in the Himalaya is very Anglo-centric, and it's imperialism. It's coming to visit these mountains. It's going into them. We look at all the challenges that were there. And 1953, on the first ascent of Mount Everest, that it was Tenzing Norgay and Ed Hillary, was a wonderful move on behalf of the leader, John Hunt, that they had an Easterner and a Westerner to do that. And it was a milestone in mountaineering history. And it sort of made our community more multicultural. And then following the lead of Tenzing Norgay and Ed Hillary, in that they gave back to their communities, be it in Darjeeling or through the Himalayan Trust under Ed Hillary with education and hospitals, that there's something that the people that live in these mountains are part of the experience, and more of the experience, and from my point of view, and so that was always in that sense to get back to it. And within India, there's the Nehru Institute of Mountaineering and with Kashi, and was a great program, and but it teaches climbing in a very structured manner, which is good. It has a lot of people that come there to go climbing with it, but it's not like bouldering or sort of questing out on your own expedition and doing it your own way and learning by trial and error, which is how so much of what climbing is. And so in looking at race relations where we are now globally, that there is social capital that I have as a mountaineer, having spent 43 years climbing, and that's all I've done. And it's always been in a pursuit of climbs, and work was to pursue climbing. And then once I could turn climbing into a profession, I enjoyed that, and I'm here today. But it's my deep feeling that this knowledge that our culture and climbing, as you pointed out, that is older, it's that we can share it and we can grow from it. And much in the same way that the knowledge of India appeals to the West, whether it's through yoga or spiritualism or either of the great religions, Islam or Hinduism, that come from, that are part of the Indian history, Christianity, Buddhism, all these, moving them around, that there is that same opportunity to share knowledge.
Did you, were you talking about the expedition in 1953, and obviously you've been a part of that story in some way, you know, with your discovery of George Mallory's body and such. At the time, did you evolve into the viewpoints you have currently, or did you sort of always feel this way, that there was something a bit imbalanced in the power dynamic around exploration? Is this your viewpoint after years? Oh,
It was, yeah, part of it is for 5 years when I was young, second to seventh grade, for 5 years. We lived in Asia, so in Japan and in Hong Kong. So this definitely opened my eyes at a young age in the 70s to where the world was. And my first Himalayan expedition was in 1988, and that was to Jammu and Kashmir. We went to Kishtwar and climbed there. And initially I was like, yeah, this is going to be about me. I'm going to climb some great thing and write about it, and I'll be a hero in everyone's mind. And you're just feeding the ego. But then I realized, meeting the people that were there, from the apple farmers to the goat herders to the people that were living in these valleys, and listening to their stories. And for them, there was, why would you go climbing? Life is hard enough as it is. And as you go higher up, and altitude takes into play, and rocks fall, and it's cold, it's miserable. You're basically not having a comfortable time. It's not a vacation at Goa when you go into the mountains. It's kind of suffering. We get that. But that was in seeing that that disparity with that. And part of it was my parents. And so my father's from Northern California. My mother was from East Germany. They've both passed on. But my mother was a year old when Hitler came to power in the Third Reich, and lived in a small village outside of Dresden. So when she was 13 years old, and experienced the firebombing of that and the atrocity of war, and that very much shaped her view. And she wanted nothing more than to get out of there and have a new chance at a life with my father and his view. And so being from Northern California and in the 60s, and being looking at the big picture, my father was he saw what we were talking about, what Martin Luther King was in the civil rights movement in the United States, and saw the value of that, and then taught that to us, my siblings and I, as a value set that we would want to have it direct our life and be some part of it. And I think that was part of it. But and the more that I've traveled to the Himalaya, and climbed with in the mountain ranges, and climbed with the local climbers, and mostly with Sherpa climbers on 8,000 meter peaks, that you're one and the same. And now that in Indian climbing culture and in Nepali climbing culture, there's people that are now 2-3 generations into climbing as it's progressing. So not necessarily as a vocation. So the early Sherpa that worked on Everest were there because it was a job. Expeditions came to town, carried the equipment, take on risk and earn money for it to help the Barasab get to the top of the mountain. That was kind of the economic model. And
Yeah.
I see now with the Sherpa that we work with at the Khumbu Climbing Center that are third generation people that have worked in the mountains. Their grandfather worked, I'll use Pemba as an example, Pemba Sharwa as an example, that his grandfather worked with Ed Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, and his father climbed Everest in the 80s. And now he's a climber himself. But rather than it be strictly a vocation, they're avocational about it. So they're like, this is what I love to do. Let's go climb a water ice, or let's open up a new sport route, or check out this little bouldering area near our village. Let's work on it. And things like that, that they're climbing because it's fun and it's also their identity. And that when climbing becomes your identity, then you're part of that community.
That's a really nice way to put it, because there's so much of climbing has been punctuated with nationality and first so and so and first German or first American, and it's really nice
Yeah.
how you explain that transition. When it actually comes down to movement, it's simply a single identity. And I'm glad you brought up your work with the Khumbu Climbing Center, because it's incredible. It's a great model for mentorship, and something that is a conversation currently in India is, I wouldn't say there aren't female climbers, but definitely we can have a better infrastructure for women to enter the sport. And, yeah, because there clearly is, I mean, you could say 80% of the climbers, or at least 85% of them, are men and 15 are women. And it would be great if more women could enter the sport. And there are a variety of sociocultural barriers, from personal safety to orthodoxy to economy to a variety of things. In that light, I wanted to ask you about the Didi initiative that you set up at the Khumbu Climbing Center. How did that come about? What have been the effects of that? Because I feel it's something we could really learn from.
Yeah, thank you. So that was with my wife, Jenny. And so she and I are co-founders of the Khumbu Climbing Center, along with Paniru Sherpa from the village of Forse. So he and I were working together on an expedition and kind of came up with, wow, this would be great to climb in the spirit of fun, but at the same time learn to be better climbers. And so the Didi initiative, Didi means sister. And so the goal with that has been to provide opportunity for women to go climbing. And so we've the Khumbu Climbing Center takes place each year in the winter, and so there'll be 8 classes, 10 students each class. So basically 100 people go through the program, and we use ice climbing and as a medium to train for mountaineering. But there's also, if it's sunny out, you can rock climb. There's first aid, there's tourism skills, natural history, things that you learn within it. But to have an all women's group within that was a lot better, because if we had 10 women and there was 2 women in each group, it just, with young people, they weren't thinking about climbing, they were thinking about dating. So it was what humans do, and that wasn't a good thing. But to have an all women's group, and so now with Dewa Youngsum, who's a Sherpani from the Rawling Valley, and she's a UIGM mountain guide. So she's leading that along with an assistant guide, and then all women, and that giving them an opportunity. So the having a scholarship for travel and for equipment to encourage women to come up and have a go at it, and it's been really good. And Nepal has, through the women that have climbed on Everest, there's quite a bit of recognition within that does well. So whatever we can do to take what we have as knowledge and experience in climbing and share it with other groups, then again, it comes back to that climbing is a great message and a great way for humans to communicate with other humans.
You should really, if it's not been on your mind, or at least if it's come up in discussion with some of your peers, you should consider working on something like this in India. There's real potential, and I think it's a scene which could really do with a catalyst like this. It could definitely ease the entry of a lot of women into, whether it's bouldering, whether it's sport climbing or trad, or you're talking about mountaineering. It would be great.
Yeah, let's make it happen. So, invitation to anyone out there listening. Let's have, Indian women be part of next year's Kumbhu Climbing Center. Learn from the programs that's going on there, how it is structured, and then let's take these ideas and share them and get. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to traveling to India and Nepal and Pakistan and that part of the Central Asia. I love that. I can't. COVID's taken away the opportunity to travel there, but it's so much a part of traveling there, and it means a lot to me, and I have a deep respect for Indian culture and my Indian climbing friends. So I can't wait to get back. Let's make let's create good.
I was about to ask you, isn't like, are you feeling restless given that, there's so many travel restrictions? Or have you gotten a bit better at dealing with that antsiness, given that you can't travel internationally now, you can't go where you want to go? How's that been on your mind?
Yeah. Well, I'm 57 today, shy of 58. And in 2016, I had a heart attack climbing Lunagri with David Lama. And so there's kind of a wake-up call, like, okay, you can let go of the 6,000 to 7,000 meter granite peaks that I really enjoyed climbing. So that maybe if I was 30, 40 years younger and I was where I had to go and try myself on these climbs, I would feel a bit of anxiety. But it's given us a chance to take a step back, to reset, look at what is important in our life, and to reprioritize. And one of the aspects of where we are right now is that everyone was like, when will it get back to normal? What is the new normal? And we have this opportunity when we create the new normal that we don't have to bring some of this stuff in the past back to the normal. Like, let's wake up, let's let it go. So one of those is systemic racism and how prevalent it is in the United States and by extension in India, and understanding that, and realizing that even though it's not you or I, it's not very far removed generationally. And by ignoring it doesn't help it out. Ignoring it is being silent and being complicit to it, and letting the system that allows other people benefits at the expense of others it's not right. And so as we go forward in the new norm, that we can have a more inclusive and equitable society on a global level.
Well, geez, that is definitely something to aspire towards. It's just there's so many little things to do, and it's the pyramid, like you said, and there's so many little layers at which we need to work that out. And one of the opinions that I've always held is that the storytelling around climbing, the writing, the filmmaking, the podcast, whatever you will, it would be nice if there are more diverse perspectives and voices stepping in. I think media is, give or take, a sort of literature of the modern age. It's what people base their worldviews on. It's what people base their interactions and opinions on, stereotypes, cliches, for that matter, ideas about ideas and ideologies about a country and its people, it's often formed by years of media consumption. And I've felt that coming out of this, one of the things the outdoor industry could learn is, okay, we've told stories in a certain way so far. What is the impact of the stories we tell, and how can we retell them? Who should be telling them? How can we inject diverse eyes or perspectives into these stories? I mean, if you're telling a story from India, you could have an American climber telling that story, and then you can also have an Indian climber telling the story, and then you get a more wholesome viewpoint, which I feel is one of the things that's going to benefit everyone. Because otherwise it ends up, if we don't take a look at storytelling, it's one of those things that only gets the spotlight during a moment of uproar. Someone says the wrong thing on social media, someone kind of slips in their use of language, and then everyone says this isn't right and that isn't right. So it's just a thought out there as to a change, feeding off what you said.
Yeah, it's a great way of looking at that, and that's part of the paradigm shift that hopefully conversations like this can lead to in climbing in the Indian subcontinent, so that there's it's not just myself and Renan and Jimmy going to Meru and challenging it again, Meru, but that we are part of we share the challenges with Indian climbers, and that it would be that when I travel to climb in the Khumbu, I'm always mostly climb with Nepali climbers, and enjoy that experience of being there with them, and knowledge, say, in establishing a route that's taken me years of knowledge to learn how to do that someone else had taught me, that if I can share that knowledge with them, and then in the process, the story that we share with the media is one of compatibility and compassion, empathy, working with other people, and not so class or race stratified that it would be in that sense. And in that, the outdoor industry is aware that it's been behind in this, and is making an effort individually as brands, and other ways to have more, have it be more open and more inclusive,
Collaborative, if you will. Or
yeah, so here we have climbing is going to be in the Olympics, and so like this big moment for all of us that have been climbing, and it's been my life forever. But what is the Olympics? It's nothing but nation against nation with flag waving and parades and all that stuff. We're climbers. We should have our own get together where we're not. Competition. Who's the strongest? Who's the fastest? I guess that's all part of it. But that was never my motivation in climbing. I'm not the best climber. I'm not the strongest climber, and I've never made myself out to be that way, especially in Himalayan alpine climber. They're stronger climbers than I am, but to me, it's the experience that we have, and finding ways to take that experience and share it with other people. And we tend to do that through media, and media now it's our handheld computers and what we're putting up on Instagram and what people are in, that communication back with them, the algorithms that Facebook, which owns the Instagram, and Facebook itself is the dominant media channel that climbers communicate from, and then their algorithms, and what are they telling us, what's important with that. And it's a media in climbing is it's good that we're having this conversation, and that we'll share this globally, and that if we all are aware of it, we'll get something out of it.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation. It's one that's sort of always on my mind, because you're also being fed with new media every day, so it's something to react to. And see, you brought up Meru, and and your motivations and the way you've approached climbing. And you've probably heard this a zillion times, but it was such an incredible movie. It was so human. And that's what I liked about it. I was just telling my wife the other day that, it doesn't matter if someone has climbed or not climbed or will never climb. This is a very human movie. It, I absolutely love that aspect of it, how there were the three of you, and, it didn't aim for anything but itself. It dug into the human struggles that you guys have had and that have come to define your goals and your methods, so to speak. And um, and you've clearly experienced a lot of loss in your life. A lot of loss, a lot of tragedy, a lot of moments where you've had to recalibrate yourself, and you felt like you were on one road and then you suddenly had to take another. How has your process of dealing with loss grown over the years?
Yeah, well, thank you for the kind words about Meru, and it wouldn't be possible without Renan and Jimmy as climbing partners, and then Jimmy and his wife Chai creating that film Meru. So it would have been a few pages in an obscure mountain journal had they not pulled that film together. And it was interesting as COVID was the dominant conversation. There was a lot of people that were watching it and finding a story of that resonated with them. Yeah, the reality of climbing is it's a very dangerous sport, and there's not if you've been in it any length of time, especially in Himalayan climbing, then there's you will come across death. You will lose friends, and that is it's no fun. It's not. It sucks. It's the worst part of this, and that I look at my notebook of the friends that collectively our community has lost, and it's quite a burden to bear, and especially because we're doing it on our own volition, accepting, say, Sherpa that are being paid to carry equipment to the ice fall, and it's a different way of looking at it. But say if alpinism climbing is your vocation and it takes the life of people close to you, you're left with a quite a burden. And when it first struck, when I was young, it was just unbearable. I didn't know why it had happened. It should have happened to someone else. We were better prepared. Or then when it does strike you, it's like, well, I should have been the one that didn't make it back, and my partner should have lived. And so that the weight, the guilt of being a survivor is pretty heavy. And so having seen that and being able to offer an ear to people and resources to people that are going through this, especially in their 20s and 30s, when life is taken and it's not in the sequential manner in which we're brought to understand how life is. Sequential being that grandma passes away before the baby does. And so when an infant dies, yes, it's the weight, and it's just how we work with that. So and it's the one thing that we can learn from loss in the mountains and in life is how precious life is, and that you don't want to squander it. You want to make every day that the best day of your life, and you're going to be where you are, doing what you are, which is talking to you around the world, halfway around the world on a computer, and smiling, getting to know you, talk about really make that your very best day. And that and in that sense, it's one is that climbing has given me a value set for life and how precious it is and how important it is to me. And the other side of it is that I don't trivialize violence. I don't go to movies that have gratuitous violence and people getting shot. And I mean, it just I don't experience that in life. And 200 years ago, we life was difficult, and when someone passed away, it was news in the smaller community, the village, and so we didn't. But now you can turn on your computer or your television set, and you'll see all manner of fictionalized movies that are trading on violence, and they're kind of it's like eye candy, but they're not understanding the depth of what it means to the human soul, what loss is. And I think that we experience that in climbing, and it puts us in a place to take life at the moment with as much as we can, but it also asks us to internally as a group to be like, no, we don't need these fictionalized movies of people of loss and whatnot. So a little bit of a transition there.
No. It's. I have a 5-year-old, and one of the things that I've often, I wouldn't say struggled to rationalize, but something that I've observed is how common guns are as toys. Every three
Yeah,
or 4-year-old has a gun toy, and it's these
yeah,
plastic guns. They've never held a gun before, and most of them would probably never hold a gun in their lives, let alone use it. But it is so common, and it often baffles me as to how normalized this is. And people tend to go into an uproar about other things, and there are these cartoons that are showing one squirrel shoot another one, and where YouTube's opened up this Pandora's box of really weird content for kids. And it's always a starting point that I've seen. If you want to really do something meaningful in the way people look at the world, it's good to start with children's books and children's literature and the things that form people's foundational listening, foundational hearing, foundational viewing, because this then these what they take from there, they put out the ideas upon which they build their worldview. But at 17 or 18, when you've already consumed a lot of violence and you've already consumed media of a certain kind, then it becomes repair work. It's kind of like building a car from scratch versus constantly making engine modifications on something. And yeah, you can repair it, but it's always going to give you trouble.
yeah,
And it's actually seriously disturbing globally, and as a parent, it's something I relate to.
yeah. One of my mother's rules as we were growing up, and so I was born into the Third Reich and the Second World War, and saw the atrocities firsthand, and just that we were never allowed to have toy guns at the house. We never were allowed to play guns. There was never, we just didn't have that, and that was a rule, because for her, she said, war is no game, and it is. She had seen it firsthand, and it was. As an example, Deer Hunter, which is a movie about the Vietnam War that came out in
78.
yeah, and so we went to the theater, and I remember watching that with my mother, and the movie finished, and everyone left the theater, and she was there, and it's sobbing in tears. It was a really emotional moment for her, and she didn't talk about the war. She wanted to move on. She said, "Today is a new day," and that's probably come over to me towards conflict avoidance as a personality trait. But she also saw, and it was just so for me to see on an emotional level. And when I was 17 years old and that movie came out, and my mother, and how it just tore her apart, and that for her what the meaning of war was. And it's interesting in the well, I have a German cousin, so he's the same age post-war, and when I communicate with them, this generation is they realize the atrocities of the First and Second World War, and have done their best to make amends and move on for it. Obviously, there's people that don't see the same thing and are still thinking the same way here in the United States, in regards to racism and power. But that we keep repeating these mistakes, and when are we going to learn? And this double inflection point between COVID and the world's largest, most significant civil rights movement, and this is global. This is reckoning for all that's gone on. And it's been conversations. I mean, we would talk about it with my Indian friends when we're having samosas in Delhi and with a Kingfisher beer, and be like, oh yeah, colonialism, imperialism, and then it would go on. But now it's like, yeah, tear those statues down, get rid of the edifice of what that is, come to terms with what this world is as a result of colonialism, imperialism, cultural imperialism, a lot of these forces, and that you're not going to be able to move on until you acknowledge and fully recognize what it is, where the weaknesses are, what needs to be taken back. And that's why the new norm, when we collectively, that new norm is shaped, we don't write it out in a book and say, this is going to be the new norm. It's a function of societal values and the way each individual acts, that collectively people like you and I who, and the listeners here are like, we want to see a more just and equitable world. As individuals, we have to be the people of that change.
Yeah, and I think, climbing, it's I think it has a role. I mean, because it is art at a level. I see it sort of moves between art and sport. And sometimes when people ask, what even is the point of climbing? Does it, make a difference to anyone's life? No, it's not policy making, it's not legislation, but it can come to have the same value that all art does. And sometimes just doing something from a place of love, doing something from a place of from a good place, it has its value. It has its value. It rubs off on the people around you. And if you're a good person with 4 or 5 of the people around you, that that's enough sometimes, because that incremental effect can do a lot more than always waiting for a big movement or something to come to a head and then cause a change. It's such a weird, it's such a broad topic, but these are just thoughts that I'm throwing out, feeding off what you said.
Yeah. Well, if we think of art as something that, for the person that creates the art and the person that observes the art, that participates in the art, that asks questions. Beauty to me is a pine tree, is a glacier, is the palm frond, is an animal. That's beauty. To say, oh, art needs to be beauty, it's great. That's one interpretation, but I think art needs to ask questions, and that's the key part on it. Is it asking questions? And in that sense, climbing as an art definitely is asking questions. It asks the internal questions. Can you do it within that? But now that where climbers are in 2020, we will be asking these questions with an eye to answering them, and to answering them with equity and inclusivity.
43 years, right? You said you've been in climbing. 40,
Yeah.
I mean, it is a life that brings you that sort of wholesome perspective. Do you remember your first climb, your very first days, at least?
We started out in the Sierras, and so when I was still in the womb with my mother, she walked around the rim of Yosemite Valley, and by age 2, we would take donkeys into the backcountry, and we'd go between Highway 108 and Highway 120 and go back and forth and camp out, and that was it. And so peak bagging and things like that. And then 14 was beginning of technical climbing and climbing mountains, things like that. But there was one when I always enjoyed backpacking and setting up camp in a tent and just sort of playing fort. I think kids love that. Your child of 5 years old likes to go do those things, and that's the child in us that appeals to that. But there was probably this moment when I was a teenager coming out of the mountains after a 2-week backpacking trip where I had this epiphany that being in the mountains is the happiest place for me to be, and that whatever I had to do in life, um, that that was of most importance. So someone might be, well, I'm going to study to be in this profession because it provides income and I can provide for my family, and that would be there, and respect for that, and in that you use income to provide for your family and give back to others. If you're just doing it for the sake of money and accumulating material wealth, and that's not the value set that I hold. But at that young age, I was like, if this is what I want to do in life, then whatever I do that would then help that out. So working as a carpenter, working as a mountain guide, being with people. And I've been fortunate to find a way to make a living at it, and that it's been meaningful in that we have conversations like we're having now, and that I've met so many wonderful people around the world that we have this instant community of friends that we sort of began our conversation with, that the universality of what climbing offers.
Um, I read somewhere that among the many experiences you've had, one of your first accidents, so to speak, was when you were 2 years old. It happened. What was that about? It was on a small peak. It was an article that I read. I forget in which publication. I think it was Outside, where apparently your dad joked about you having your first brush with death at about age 2.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there was um all right, yeah, there's probably a few. I mean, one of them I fell off the back of a pickup truck one time, or that wasn't it. But this was, I was a young boy, and
Mm.
it was, we were in the mountains, and the weather was coming in, it was storming, and my dad decided to go climb the mountain with, I was a little guy in this backpack and going up in the
Mm.
mountains with him. And so my mother, and I have 2 older sisters, they were back at the camp, and my mother was like, no way, and you're going to get struck by lightning, and don't do that. And my dad was like, oh, it's fine. And they came back. And so the family story was, even though it was raining and sideways and everything like that, that I just was like as happy as could be. And I was just in there on my father's back. So I had the comfort of my father carrying me. But that I wasn't screaming and crying, say, like a child might be if they go to the dentist for the first time, or go to, something that's not any fun with them. That was like, he was, I don't think it wasn't a near death experience, but it was comfort in discomfort. So
Comfort and discomfort. Okay, but that's a lot of adventure. In a sense, it eventually comes down to it. Well, if you have time, I have one last question. And
oh yeah, we've got time.
okay,
So yeah, let's roll with
the,
it.
the one thing that I definitely, I was really moved, and I found it of such great value that you've done some work in trying to introduce mental health care for outdoor athletes in your role with the North Face. And over the years, would you say that it's, there's less shame or weakness associated with grief? And do you think today it's easier as an athlete to be hardcore and to be vulnerable at the same time?
Yeah, and within the climbing community, and I think society at large, there's certainly, yeah, the old, well, something happened, and just carry on, say anything, and internalize it, and it just eats away at you, and it's not a healthy way of going through the process of grieving. and every culture has different processes and of grieving. And I have a very paper thin understanding of the process of the Hindu and how life and family and the next life, all that, and how that transition happens within it. But the basis of that is a support system that is there to make sure that the family and community are at peace with this, and they find a way to address that. And in the United States, it's it's such a very wide ranging ideals, culturally, from religion to spirituality, and how we address these. And that we, for many people, their community is, say, for many people, their community is religion. For many people, their work is their community. And increasingly, it's their recreation is their community. So people, if they like to fish, or if they like to mountain bike, or if they like to hike, or they're a bird watcher, or they're a climber, they find people that have that same life passion. And the cultural, religious, socioeconomic backgrounds, really, they're secondary to that. So their condition, their friendship is based on what their meaning in life is, what they doing on their path to self-actualization. And it can still be through work and through religion and community like that, but that in climbing, that we're with that. But we haven't had a system, as I had mentioned, with in all society, when people are passed away, and grieving process, the funeral, which has been put on hold. And again, we're examining these in the COVID era, like they're not the same in the past, but that we didn't have a way within the outdoor adventure community to talk about these things. And that now that that there is no shame in doing so, you're healthier off for doing it, and that understanding what the risks and the downfall of those, of not talking about them. And that is and it makes you more receptive, or more receptive to your own weaknesses and frailty. You can admit that you're grieving with someone's loss.
It just also, well, I haven't experienced loss in the outdoors, but it also creates for a more honest environment, in tune with some of the ideals that we were generally talking about over this conversation. You know, some of the things that need to change. It adds a level of empathy and understanding, which can coexist with being hardcore. You know, the two don't have to be exclusive, as it was thought at one point.
Yeah, and climbing is that way, in that we're the type of people that are going to help the small rabbit on the side of the road that needs help, or we're going to help out with other people. And that goodwill, which is based on the trust, communication, that is the foundation of what climbing is, because we're in this struggle with gravity, that we support other people, because the belay is someone else. You're trusting your life to someone else's hands. Same thing with a spot. Your life is in their hands. You're holding the rope, and that level of trust is that we find it in recreation is really special. And that's, again, coming back to this, why climbing is a great way for humans to interact with other humans, and it's a foundation for societal change.
On that note, well, thank you so much for all that insight. You know, it's yours clearly is an experienced mind, and one that has been through a spectrum of emotions and experiences that I don't know if everyone's going to have the chance to. go through. And yeah, thank you for your efforts with climbing and for everything that you've brought to the climbing world over these years. Because whether I boulder or whether you're someone, whose focus is the high mountains, it's linked. And I see that
Yeah.
very direct link. So, well, thank you for coming on to Box Talks, Conrad. It's really been a pleasure learning from
Yeah,
you.
I love hi BoxTalks everyone there, and I can't wait to visit India again and get to Delhi and check out the gym and the
Well,
I've always the yeah.
it would be great if bouldering interests you. And I've read that you still go to the gym in Bozeman, right? Montana. That's where you are
Yep,
right now.
yep, yeah. I love climbing gyms. They're a great way of community wherever I travel. And I went the other day for the first time, so we climbed with a little mask and sanitized and limited amount of people in there. We're all learning and adapting to it, but the climbing gym for me here in our community is it's my social connection. So I don't go out to a place and drink beer or anything like that, but then I know that I'll go to the climbing gym and I'll see some friends and I'll catch up with them and I'll visit with them. And that's sort of that sort of, it's not, when you set up a cookout with your family and friends and you invite the people, you're kind of in control of it. We go to the bar because you never know who you're going to meet, but going to the bar it's not my stick. So it's not my jam, so to say. I'd like to go to the climbing gym and meet people there. And so whether it's in Memphis at Memphis Rocks, which is this great give back model for climbing gyms, or in Delhi at the Indian Mountaineering Federation or Foundation, that the gym that they have there, and it's next to Delhi University. I love that.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's always you go on the speed wall when it's hot. I'm like, yeah, this is great. And everyone, we're just climbing, and even if it's hot, I mean, the absurdity of everyone's like, try harder, do it again, and that I love that. That's a great institutional knowledge of mountaineering with the library and what it offers to people. So that's a great resource. And then bouldering is a way for people to connect to their own bodies and to challenge themselves. It builds strength, flexibility, bone density, mental acuity. It builds friendship. All these things that the medical world is telling us make us live healthier and happier and longer lives. And so why not go climbing, right?
It would be lovely to have you here at Boulder Box, or just to have you in India again at some point when things open up. So
Yeah, I'll be there for sure. So I a lot of mutual friends in India, and I can't wait to get back and just to and to share a day of bouldering, to teach a class of climbing, and perhaps maybe see people in the Khumbu to go try ice climbing and learn from that. So, but yeah.
yeah, there's some stuff recently. There's also been some ice climbing development happening in the Spiti Valley. The stuff over here, it's young, but it's happening, and it's the kind of thing that would catch your interest. So yeah.
Yeah, in the winter of 1990, I visited Manali, and I stayed there for the winter. And we just went ice climbing, and it was just walk up in the mountains, and there's an incredible amount of water ice there. So, and I haven't been back. That was 1990, so 30 years ago. Just seeing the world, but it's there, and I can't wait to be back and to see more of India, because most of my India has been Delhi northwards to the mountains, but there's I just want to explore more, and it's one of my favorite countries, and peace. Everyone in India is like a friend of mine. Yeah.
All right, Conrad. Thanks again. And if it would be great at some point if you're open to another episode, in the future where we talk about another subject. There's so much I'd love to
Yep,
pick your brains on. So yeah.
100%. So
Okay.
we'll make it happen.
Yep.
Offers there. Peace. Climb safe, everyone.
All right. Bye bye, Conrad.
Bye bye.